Women don't belong in war. Get off my field. Declan Pierce said it loud enough for 500 soldiers to hear. Then he grabbed Sloane by the collar, in front of referees, in front of senior officers, in front of cameras recording every moment, and shoved her backward like she was nothing. The crowd went silent. Sloane didn't fall. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him, and that look made Declan angrier than anything else could have. He swung his leg back and drove it toward her stomach with everything he had. That was his mistake, because Sloane Decker had been waiting for exactly that moment. If this story moves you, drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, stay until the end, because what happens in that ring will change the way you think about strength forever. The gathering storm. The morning started the way most mornings at Fort Hardin started, with noise. 500 soldiers moving, shouting, stretching, arguing, laughing. The kind of organized chaos that only a massive military base in Central Texas could produce. The annual Joint Forces Combat Showcase had been running for an extensive period. It was the kind of event that made careers. Junior officers came hoping senior officers would notice them. Veterans came to prove they still had it. Instructors came to remind everyone exactly who they were. And Declan Pierce came to dominate. He always had. With consecutive top finishes in the hand-to-hand bracket and multiple commendations from his commanding officer, his reputation was so thick it practically walked into rooms before he did. He was 6'2", 230 pounds of muscle and ego, and he moved through the base like a man who believed the whole place had been built around him. As soldiers registered and collected their bracket assignments near the main administration tent, Declan stood surrounded by a small circle of his closest trainees, younger men who laughed at everything he said, who handed him things before he asked, who had learned that being near Declan Pierce was either very good for your career or very bad for your health, depending on the day. He was holding a coffee cup in one hand and scanning the bracket sheet with the other when his eyes landed on the name Sloane Decker, Navy SEAL, Arizona. He read it twice. Then he looked up at the men around him. Is this real? Corporal Holden Hayes, terrified of saying the wrong thing, leaned in to look. Yes, Sergeant. Looks real. They put a woman in the tournament. Nobody responded. They put a woman, Declan said again, slower this time, like he was explaining something to children. In a combat showcase. On a military base. In front of 500 soldiers. Private First Class Mateo Vega, who was smarter than he usually let on around Declan, kept his eyes down. He had learned that when Declan started repeating himself like that, something bad was about to be said. And whatever it was, you didn't want to be the one who agreed with it or disagreed with it. You just waited. Declan laughed a real laugh, loud and cutting. Somebody is going to be very embarrassed today, and it isn't going to be me. He dropped the bracket on the registration table and walked away, coffee cup still in hand, already bored by the conversation he had just started. But a few rows behind the registration line, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight regulation bun, wearing a plain gray training shirt and standard-issue shorts, had heard every word. Sloane Decker turned back to her own registration form and finished writing without looking up. Her hand didn't shake, her expression didn't change. She picked up her copy of the bracket, folded it twice, slid it into her pocket, and walked toward the warm-up field. Emotional weather. Sergeant First Class Naomi Reyes, Sloane's supervising officer and the woman who had personally submitted her name for the tournament, was waiting near the edge of the field with 2 water bottles and an expression that said she had also heard everything Declan said. You good? Naomi asked. I'm good, Sloane said. You heard him. I heard him. Naomi handed her a water bottle, and Sloane unscrewed the cap and took a long drink. Then she looked out at the warm-up field, where a dozen soldiers were already moving through drills. He's not wrong that people are going to be watching me differently today. That doesn't bother you? Sloane considered the question like it deserved a real answer. It bothers me the same way bad weather bothers me. It's a condition. You account for it. You don't fight it. Naomi studied her. Throughout her extensive military service, she had learned to read people, not just what they said, but how they stood when they said it. Whether their shoulders were carrying something they hadn't named yet. Sloane Decker stood the way a person stands when they have already done the hard internal work before anyone else even knew there was hard work to do. Pierce is going to come after you specifically, Naomi said quietly. You know that. I know that. Not just in the ring. He's going to try to get in your head before you even reach the bracket match. Sloane nodded slowly. Then I need to be somewhere he can't reach. She tapped the side of her head with 2 fingers. Up here. She set the water bottle down and began her warm-up. Naomi watched her go. Then she looked across the field toward where Declan Pierce was holding court with his group of trainees, talking loudly about something making them laugh. She had known Declan for a long time. She had filed 2 informal complaints against him. Both had gone nowhere. She picked up her own water bottle and told herself that today might be different. She almost believed it. The matches begin. Word had already spread through the entire base. A woman was in the bracket. Not a female officer sitting in the stands. Not a female medic or logistics coordinator. An actual competitor. A Navy SEAL with a record that when the younger soldiers bothered to look it up on the base intranet was quietly extraordinary. Graduated in the top 4% of her SEAL training class, multiple combat deployments, a commendation for close quarters engagement that had been partially classified and couldn't be fully read without clearance. Most of the soldiers who looked up her record shared the same reaction. Surprise. Then quiet. Then they went and found their friends and said, "Hey, have you seen her record?" But there were others who didn't bother looking anything up, who made up their minds in the moments it took Declan Pierce to just say her name out loud and laugh. Those soldiers were the loudest. When Sloane walked out onto the competition field for her first match, a sound moved through the crowd that was not quite a cheer and not quite a laugh. Something in between. Something that had teeth. She heard it. She registered it. And she filed it away in the same place she filed wind direction and distance calculations, useful data. Emotional weather accounted for. Her first opponent was a Marine corporal named Gaines. He was 6 feet even with the kind of upper body that suggested he spent most of his free time in the weight room. He looked at Sloane the way most of her initial opponents looked at her, with a combination of discomfort and something that looked almost like pity. "I'm not going to go easy on you," he said quietly before the referee signaled the start. Not cruel, almost apologetic, like he was warning her. "Good," Sloane said. "Don't." It wasn't that Sloane was faster than Gaines. Exactly. It was that she was faster in the right moments. When he committed to a strike, she was already moving away from it. When he shifted his weight to power a throw, she had already read the weight shift half a beat before it happened and adjusted her position. She didn't overpower him. She didn't need to. Every time he tried to dictate the terms of the fight, she quietly, efficiently declined. The takedown that ended it was clean and controlled. Gaines hit the mat, tapped out, and looked up at the ceiling of the open-air training area with the expression of a man recalculating something he thought he had already figured out. The crowd's reaction was complicated. Some soldiers applauded, genuinely, openly. Others shifted on their feet. A few exchanged glances with the people next to them. From the far side of the field, Declan Pierce watched the match with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. "Beginner's luck," he said, to nobody in particular. But Mateo Vega, standing a few feet to his left, noticed that Declan hadn't looked away from the ring for the entirety of the match. Sloane's next match brought a bigger crowd. Word had spread the way word spreads on a military base, fast, unreliable, and loud. People were describing the first bout to soldiers who hadn't seen it, each retelling adding a layer of drama that may or may not have been accurate. By the time Sloane walked out again, there were at least 200 people standing around the competition area, which was twice the usual number. Her opponent was an Army Ranger named Nash. He weighed 210 pounds, had a background in wrestling, and had watched the first match closely. He didn't look apologetic. He looked focused. The referee signaled the start, and Nash moved immediately low, driving forward with his legs, trying to close the distance and take the fight to the ground, where his wrestling would neutralize her speed. It was a smart strategy, technically correct. Sloane let him come. She sidestepped at the last possible moment, just enough to redirect his momentum rather than absorb it. And as Nash drove past her, she caught his arm at the elbow and redirected him into the mat with a control technique that was so efficient, it looked almost gentle. Nash rolled, recovered, and came back up. His expression had shifted from focus to genuinely engaged. This was a real fight now, and he knew it. They went through several exchanges. Nash was good. He adapted faster than most. He stopped going for big, powerful shots and started working angles, testing her reactions, looking for patterns. He found one, a slight hesitation on her left side when she absorbed a check. He exploited it immediately, got inside her guard, and actually held a dominant position. The crowd made a sound, and Sloane did something none of them expected. She laughed. Not loud, not theatrical. A short, quiet exhale of genuine amusement, the kind of sound that belongs in a sparring session between two people who both know what they're doing. In that fraction of distraction, Sloane reversed the position. She took him down shortly after. Nash Tapp sat up and looked at her with something in his eyes that had no hostility in it at all. "You're good," he said. "You're good too," she said, and she meant it. It was the most natural exchange anyone had seen on that field. And for some reason, more than the technique or the takedowns, it was that moment, that simple exchange of two professional fighters acknowledging each other, that stayed with the soldiers who saw it. Because Declan Pierce, in all his tournament wins, had never once said that to an opponent. Shifting gravity. By the time the midday break arrived, Sloane had secured multiple wins. The base was talking about nothing else. In the mess hall at the equipment stations near the medical tent, everywhere soldiers gathered, the conversation bent toward the same subject. Some were genuinely impressed. Some were frustrated in ways they hadn't fully examined yet. And a small number were loudly, aggressively dismissive in a way that revealed more about them than they intended. Declan Pierce sat at a table with 4 of his senior trainees and ate without speaking, which was unusual for him. He was the kind of man who always had something to say. Finally, Corporal Hayes said carefully, "She's doing well." Declan looked up from his food. Hayes realized immediately he had said the wrong thing and started to correct course. "I mean, for what she is." "She's doing well," Declan said, flat, factual, like the words tasted bad. Nobody at the table said anything else. Declan pushed his tray aside and looked at the bracket sheet he had been ignoring. He studied it for a long moment. "If she wins her next match, she's in my bracket." Mateo Vega looked at his food. "She's going to be in my bracket," Declan said again, and something in his voice had shifted. It was no longer amusement. It wasn't quite anger either. It was something older and darker. The specific emotion of a man whose story about the world has just been interrupted, and who is deciding how to rewrite it. "You'll handle it," Hayes said, because he thought that was what Declan wanted to hear. Declan stared at the bracket. "I'll handle it," he agreed. But the way he said it made Vega set down his fork. As the subsequent rounds began, Sloane was aware of a change in the quality of the attention around her. The crowd was watching with the focused intensity of people who have decided they care about what happens next. She felt it not as pressure, but as information. The way a pilot feels turbulence, not as danger, but as data. Her opponent was a mixed martial arts specialist named Sergeant Briggs. He had a professional record outside the military and moved with the loose, easy confidence of someone who had been in front of crowds before. He also possessed a 25-pound weight advantage, a 4-inch reach advantage, and the fact that he was genuinely dangerous. Naomi Reyes stood at the edge of the field, arms folded, and felt something she hadn't felt in a professional capacity in a very long time. She felt nervous. Not because she didn't believe in Sloane, but because she understood exactly how much weight was sitting on the outcome. Not just for the bracket, but for every female soldier on this base who had filed a complaint that went nowhere, who had been talked over in briefings, who had been handed the easier assignment, not because they wanted it, but because someone decided for them. Briggs opened with a combination that was technically crisp and genuinely fast. Sloane covered and redirected. They engaged fiercely. Briggs was the best opponent Sloane had faced. He was smart, athletic, and experienced, adjusting his approach after Sloane neutralized his initial strategies. He scored a clean point on an opening she covered too slowly. The crowd exhaled, and then something shifted in Sloane. Not panic, not desperation. Something quieter. Naomi would later describe it as focus dropping to a different level, like a lens sharpening. Sloane stopped reacting to Briggs. She started reading him. There is a profound difference between a fighter who responds to what is happening and a fighter who anticipates what is about to happen. For the remainder of the bout, Sloane stopped responding. She scored consecutive points on openings that Briggs did not know were openings until they had already become problems. The final takedown was controlled, technically precise, and ended the match without drama. Briggs stood up, rolled his shoulder, and looked at her with open respect. "Who trained you?" "My father, mostly," Sloane said. Briggs nodded slowly. "Your father did good work." Sloane went still for just a moment. A single beat invisible to almost everyone watching. Then she nodded once. "Yes," she said quietly. "He did." The eve of the storm. As the matches concluded, the updated brackets were posted on the official boards. A crowd gathered immediately because 2 names now sat in the final column: Sergeant Declan Pierce and Petty Officer Sloane Decker. A private named Lawson stared at the board. He had joined the Army because he believed in service as something serious that demanded the best of you. He had also believed what most people around him believed, that there was a natural ceiling on what a woman could do in a combat context. Not because he was cruel, but because nobody had ever shown him otherwise. He found Vega nearby. "Hey, you've seen Pierce fight. What happens next?" Vega was quiet. He had known Declan for years. He had also watched every one of Sloane's matches. "Honestly," Vega said, "I don't know. And that's the first time I've been able to say that about a Pierce match." "Is that good or bad? Ask me when it's over." That night, Sloane sat alone in the competitor preparation room. Spread across the floor was a 16-page printout of Declan Pierce's recorded match history. Declan was powerful, aggressive, and technically proficient, with 41 wins on record, 9 of them by dominant early decision. He had 1 loss on record against a senior instructor who had since retired. Sloane read the description of that loss twice. Declan's 1 loss came when his opponent refused to engage with him on his terms, refused to match his energy, refused to react to his taunting, and controlled the pace of the fight. The senior instructor had been patient. He had made Declan come to him again and again, until Declan's aggression became his own undoing. Sloane set the papers down and stared at the ceiling. Her father's voice came to her. He had believed that fighting was a skill you learned not by brute force, but by attention, by patience, by the kind of respect for an opponent that required you to understand them before you tried to defeat them. The goal is never to hurt someone, he had told her when showing her defensive holds. The goal is to stop being hurt. If you know the difference, you'll always fight cleaner than someone who doesn't. She still heard his voice most clearly when the stakes were highest. Gathering the papers, she lay down on the narrow cot, stared at the dark ceiling, and let herself breathe. The inevitable was coming. She planned to be ready. Across the base, 3 Pentagon-attached observers were having a quiet conversation. Officially there for a training evaluation, Colonel Adler and her colleagues were actually scouts assessing how individuals handled unquantifiable pressure. Colonel Adler set down her coffee cup. "Decker," she said simply. The other 2 nodded. "I want to see the match before making any decisions," she added. "But, Decker," the collision. The day of the match arrived the way trouble always arrives on a military base. Quietly at first, and then all at once. Every soldier knew that Sloane had gone undefeated, and that she was now facing Declan Pierce. That reality created a specific kind of energy, the kind you could feel in how conversations stopped when the wrong person walked by. Mateo Vega had not slept well. Lying awake, he knew it was the specific, dangerous expression Declan had worn the night before. The quiet, cold calculation of a man deciding that the outcome was not going to be left to chance. Vega found Corporal Hayes near the equipment station. "Did you talk to Pierce?" Hayes' expression shifted. "He's focused, like I've never seen him before. He's not treating this like a tournament match." "What's he treating it like?" Hayes shook his head. "He looked at me and said, 'She's not leaving that ring on her own feet.' I don't know what happens today, Vega." Vega watched him walk away. He thought about Sloane Decker, about Declan's unchecked power, and about his own career. He picked up his gear bag, making a decision he would spend a long time reflecting on. On the warm-up field, Sloane was sitting cross-legged, breathing in a slow, controlled rhythm. She looked like someone who had found a quiet room inside herself that nobody else had access to. Naomi arrived with coffee and observed the absolute stillness. It meant Sloane had already fought the internal storm, the fear, the doubt, and survived it in the dark. "Pierce is scared," Sloane said, taking the coffee. "Pierce doesn't get scared. Everyone gets scared. The ones who can't admit it turn it into rage. Which means he's going to come at me harder than he ever has. And he's going to make mistakes." Naomi looked at her. "And you? What are you here for?" "Because he called me an embarrassment in front of my peers," Sloane said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "I'm not here to prove a point. I'm here because this is where I'm supposed to be, and nobody gets to decide that for me." Declan's preliminary bouts were not elegant. He moved through his opponents with the focused brutality of someone rehearsing for the fight that comes after. The crowd responded loudly, but a significant portion of the soldiers were uncharacteristically silent, watching with expressions bridging discomfort and critical assessment. The base had shifted, and Declan had not yet registered the change. Sloane's preliminary match against a Special Forces sergeant named Knox was a masterclass in disciplined patience. Knox was smart, but Sloane found a microscopic delay in his right side recovery, building toward an opening, like laying the groundwork for an argument. The decisive takedown earned the loudest, broadest applause of the tournament. Across the field, Declan heard it. Vega watched Declan's right hand close into a fist and release, cycling like a pressure valve. Unable to ignore his conscience, Vega walked to the administration office and sat before Sergeant Major Caldwell. He delivered the facts flawlessly. Declan's threats, The aggressive intent, the closed fists. Caldwell listened without interrupting, then picked up his radio and ordered additional oversight and protocol reviews for the match. Vega walked away feeling the heavy weight of having done the right thing without knowing if it would matter. When Sloane stepped to the edge of the competition field, the crowd was the largest in the tournament's history. Soldiers stood 5 deep. The sound was a low, continuous murmur.
"How do you feel?"
Naomi asked. "Clear," Sloane said. "I know he needs this win more than I do, and that makes me more dangerous than he understands." Declan watched her approach. For one unguarded microsecond, his expression flickered, the shadow of a man realizing the story he had told himself might be entirely wrong. Then his face hardened, and he stepped into the ring. The referee issued a stern warning about unsanctioned escalation. Declan stared right through him at Sloane.
"Ready."
Declan moved. He exploded forward with terrifying speed, throwing a combination designed to obliterate. Sloane moved left outside his power line. He turned and swung again. She moved right. The crowd gasped as they realized what they were witnessing. Declan's massive momentum carried him past his balance point. Sloane redirected him with just enough pressure at the perfect angle. Declan stumbled. His calculation vanished, replaced by raw, surging rage. He came at her again, and every time his force was absorbed and returned at unexpected angles. Sloane wasn't fighting Declan. She was letting Declan fight himself. He was burning energy, landing nothing. He stopped in the center of the ring, chest heaving. For the first time in his life, Sergeant Declan Pierce did not know what to do. The silence was agonizing. He had built his identity on dominance, and now he was standing in the exact center of absolute impotence. "Stop dancing!" Declan finally shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "Fight me! Stop running and fight me like you mean it!" Sloane didn't answer. Her silence hit him harder than any counterstrike. He had used his voice as a weapon his entire career to incite emotional reactions. Sloane treated it like weather. She accounted for it and moved on. Declan abandoned all strategy, rushing her on pure emotion. He threw a catastrophic right hand aimed at her shoulder. Sloane slipped it by mere inches, stepping inside his guard to land 2 short, precise strikes to his ribs, just accurate enough to communicate, "I know exactly where you are, and you do not know where I am." Changing tactics. Declan tried to use his massive weight advantage, grinding and pushing to exhaust her. For a moment, he gained position, and a flash of relief crossed his face. But the second he committed his weight entirely, Sloane yielded beautifully. She rotated, redirecting his heavy momentum, and executed a flawless takedown. Declan hit the mat with the sound of 230 pounds of committed momentum arriving exactly where it hadn't planned to go. The crowd erupted. Declan got up. He always got up. But his face had changed. The fighter was gone. What remained was a man fighting purely to destroy. "You think that counts?" he hissed. They reset. Declan pressed forward, trying to force a war of attrition. But every exchange drained him further. Feeling the crowd's anxiety, he pushed harder and left an opening. Sloane took it instantly. Using his forward pressure, she rotated him violently, driving him face first into the mat and locking his arm at the absolute edge of its joint tolerance. "Tap or call!" the referee shouted. Declan refused, his jaw ground into the mat. Finally, barely audible, he choked out, "Out." The applause was a seismic event. Declan stood, chest heaving, drowning in the specific humiliation of a man beaten on his own terms. He had no path to victory, and that was where everything fractured. As they reset for the final exchange, Declan feigned a takedown. Instead, he swung his leg back with zero control, unleashing a wildly illegal, full-force kick aimed directly at her midsection. The referee screamed. The crowd gasped in horror. Sloane didn't step back. Relying on endless hours of training and the echo of her father's wisdom, she stepped in. Her hands caught his leg mid-swing, precise as instruments. The rotation came from her hips. It was simple physics. His devastating force returned directly to a joint not designed to absorb it. The crack was sickeningly loud. Declan collapsed. He didn't stumble. He suffered a total structural failure. The base fell into absolute, deafening silence. The medical team swarmed the ring. Declan lay staring at the sky, his face pale with physiological shock. Sloane stood nearby, breathing steadily. There was no triumph in her posture, just the solemn reality of what had occurred. Naomi was beside her in an instant. "I didn't mean to," Sloane said quietly. "I know," Naomi replied, her voice ironclad. "You caught an illegal strike that was already in motion. That was physics, not intent. You are not responsible for his choices." Sloane looked at the Pentagon observers. Colonel Adler looked back with an expression of absolute, profound validation. She had found exactly what she was looking for. As Declan was loaded onto a stretcher, the crowd parted for Sloane, a spontaneous, silent path of immense respect. Private Lawson watched her pass, realizing his entire framework of the world had just cracked wide open. The repercussions. The footage exploded online. It bypassed normal channels, jumping from private groups to veterans forums to national news networks. Millions of views poured in. In Sergeant Major Caldwell's sparse office, Sloane recounted the match precisely. Caldwell confirmed the footage cleared her completely. Declan had initiated a vicious assault. She had executed a proportional defense. "I regret that he got hurt," Sloane said truthfully. "I don't regret stopping him." Caldwell noted Vega's prior warning on the official record. The base itself remained deeply divided, but the cognitive dissonance was heavy. Corporal Hayes sat in his barracks watching the clip repeatedly, realizing the devastating cost of his own silence. Mateo Vega lay awake, carrying the complicated weight of a man who did the right thing, but wondered if it was enough. The world debated the footage violently. Yet the segment that resonated most profoundly wasn't the brutal crack of the kick. It was the quiet seconds afterward, Sloane standing over Declan, offering no theatrical victory, just human gravity. It shifted deeply entrenched perspectives across the country. Sloane refused to capitalize on the moment. "It was a defensive response," she told Naomi. "The rest of it, the video, the news, the politics, that's not mine. I'm not going to claim it." Months later, a sealed envelope arrived on Naomi's desk. Sloane opened it, and her unshakable composure finally fractured tears welling in her eyes. The Pentagon had accepted her into the historically closed Advanced Warfare Unit, explicitly citing her controlled force application and psychological command under extreme duress. The very incident designed to humiliate her had become her ultimate credential. Sloane gave a single interview to journalist Silas Sterling. She refused to act as a symbol. "The goal is never to hurt someone," she quoted her late father, her voice carrying a quiet grief. "The goal is to stop being hurt. What happened in that ring was my training and the decision of one man who chose to break the rules." In a rehabilitation clinic, Declan Pierce watched the unedited broadcast. Stripped of his armor, he confronted the agonizing gap between who he thought he was and who he had actually become. He requested paper and a pen. It took several grueling attempts, but he wrote a letter to Sloane Decker. He made no excuses. He admitted his deep-seated fear of individuals with intrinsic worth, people who didn't need a crowd's approval. He confessed to weaponizing that fear into contempt and acknowledged that she had stopped him using the only avenue he left her. Sloane read the letter, placed it in a metal keepsake box alongside her father's photo, and closed the lid. It was the quiet handling of something genuinely real. The silence after. Comprehensive military reforms were eventually released directly citing the Fort Hardin incident regarding force application and robust reporting structures. Mateo Vega read the document, found his own action immortalized, and finally understood the profound courage of integrity. At a massive leadership conference in Virginia, Sloane stood before hundreds of elite officers presenting on psychological composure. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Suddenly, a man with a permanent heavy limp walked down the aisle. The room froze. Declan Pierce stood before Sloane. He requested the microphone. Facing the stunned assembly, Declan stripped away his entire ego. "I was wrong," he stated firmly. "I confused performing strength with having it. What Petty Officer Decker did in that ring was morally correct. She didn't humiliate me. She did what needed to be done." He turned to Sloane and extended his hand. Sloane looked at his face. She read the genuine, agonizing interior reconstruction he had survived. She reached out and took his hand. The resulting applause was the monumental sound of thousands of rigid beliefs breaking and expanding. In the quiet hallway afterward, Naomi asked Sloane how she felt. "Finished." Sloane smiled softly. "My dad always said the measure of a fighter isn't what they do when they win. It's what they do with the silence after. I think I finally understand." Sloane Decker walked forward into the rest of her life. Not as a symbol or a viral story or a policy case study. She walked forward exactly as herself, which was, in the end, the only thing she had ever been trying to be. And it turned out that was more than enough.